You're listening to RealAgriculture.com. Get real, get connected.
I'm Lindsay Smith with RealAgriculture.com. I'm joined today by Pierre Patel. He's the VP of Chemistry for CropLife Canada. And Pierre, today we're talking about some interesting things afoot in the European Union. Maybe walk us through what is being discussed as far as the regulation or banning of certain fungicide products there.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. What Europe is doing is that they're trying to find a way to regulate what we call endocrine disruptors. So these are products that affect a person's endocrine system, which is any of the hormones that we have doing multiple functions in our body. The problem with this is that virtually everything is an endocrine disruptor in some fashion. So when you're exposed to sunlight, that creates an endocrine response. When you drink coffee, that creates an endocrine response in your body. So virtually everything has an endocrine effect. The question is, what disrupts in an adverse way your endocrine system? That's where the crux of this should be lying, but it isn't, unfortunately.
And so at issue are several classes of or I think at least two classes, if not three, or I should say different actives. And these, of course, are very familiar. So which ones specifically are at issue in the EU?
Well, what they're describing is some criteria that would say, okay, any product that falls below this sort of cutoff won't even make it past the initial assessment phase and will be phased out of use, and which is what we call a hazard-based approach. And many of the products from our initial look at this include the entire azole class of fungicide, which is a very, very critical class of compounds, very familiar to virtually every grower, especially in cereals, for Fusarium and a number of other types of diseases that you're trying to control. And our initial assessment shows that those products would fall below this cutoff line that Europe is proposing, and that's extremely problematic. The number of products, like the actual brand name products, there's dozens that would be impacted, but it would severely restrict the farmers' ability to control a number of the diseases that affect common crops grown here.
And so where's the impetus coming from, and where does this sit with the EU as of right now? Because as far as I understand it, this is, of course, a maybe banned discussion. This is a discussion that's happening, nothing set in stone yet. So where are we at, and where is the drive coming from on potentially either phasing out or banning products?
Well, they're in the consultation phase right now until mid or late January. So they're open for comments, if you will, on their proposed roadmap. The impetus really is the climate in Europe over the past number of years has become very environmental activist focused, and they are chipping away at the ability of European farmers to use almost any tool. And the difference with Europe and most other parts of the world is their overall approach. Most of the world, including the U.S. and Canada, uses a risk-based approach, meaning that you can have a product that has some hazards to it, i.e. it may be toxic, or it may be flammable, or there may be a number of factors to it, but you mitigate those by doing a risk assessment, and you say, okay, can this product be used safely so that it doesn't pose a risk to the user, to the environment, and that. And what they've done in Europe is they've migrated to a hazard-based approach, meaning if a product doesn't pass this threshold, they won't even look at it to see if it can be used safely. And so that difference in approach is what's extremely troubling and concerning, because I'll give you a real-life example. If you look at electricity, if you look at it just on a hazard basis, you would never allow electricity to be used. It's far too dangerous. It kills people if they touch it. But if we wrap plastic around it and put it into extension cords, then we can safely transport electricity, and there is very little risk to that user. And taking the approach that Europe is taking on pesticides, they're handcuffing their farmers and removing so many of the tools that they're able to use.
So now, where then does the climate in Canada or the U.S., but obviously specifically for Canada, are there rumblings here? Have there been cases of concern with these products in Canada?
Well, the U.S. and Canada has been part of this. Almost 20 years ago, developed an endocrine disruptor screening program, they called it. So this was about identifying in a priority basis compounds that they felt would show the most potential as being endocrine disruptors with an adverse effect. And they started to work with other regulators, with the industry and other industries to develop protocols and criteria to how to assess these endocrine disrupting compounds. And they've been working on this for 20 years, and they've gotten through a number of compounds. They've worked out the protocols. They've worked out the approach. They're getting close to a system where they can consistently assess these types of products for that endocrine disrupting potential. And yet Europe seems to be ignoring that 20 years of work and expertise that's gone on into that system, and are trying to develop a simple cutoff-based system in Europe, and that's extremely concerning.
So now, let's assume that this moves forward, and that is, of course, not set in stone at this point, but let's assume then that certain classes or certain fungicides are removed from the regulatory system in the EU. Could this have an impact on crop tonnage that we send over there, that we are using these products? How might MRLs be impacted, or how might shipping be impacted?
That's a good question, because in some compounds that they've eliminated, it didn't really affect exporters because you're still allowed to export that product to Europe. In this case, though, the way their legislation is set up is that if they remove a product for a health reason, which in this case would be health related, then they're not allowed to keep the import tolerance as it was, so the import MRL. So then it would default back to a zero, or at close to zero, at 0.01 parts per million, which is virtually zero. And so the problem then is that even though Canada, the U.S., and other exporting nations have assessed these products through our rigorous system and safe to use for farmers, and have established MRLs for those compounds, they could be in serious trouble when if that product is exported to Europe and is tested for residue and is found to have residue that is below our MRL but not below their 0.01 parts per million. So it effectively regulates our farmers' ability to use products that we've registered through our rigorous system because of these trade concerns.
Right. So now, how then, or is there a timeline for the EU to make a decision on these products?
Well, this approach, like I said, the consultation on the approach is open until January. We are working very closely with our colleagues in other nations, and especially exporting nations, and we're encouraging the Canadian government as well to take a position on this and to put in a strong position statement on behalf of an exporting agricultural nation. And we're hoping that the trade impacts of this globally will resonate within Europe, especially at this time of ongoing financial crisis in Europe. We're hoping that this will resonate with them and make them take a sober second look. The very conservative initial estimates for Canadian agriculture, based on a report that I can send you, shows that the impacts could be, just on our major export crops, could be over 1.5 billion euros. So whatever the conversion rate is on that, but over 1.5 billion euros could be affected for trade going to Europe from Canadian farms.
Per year?
Per year.
Okay. I don't know what the current
I think
exchange is, but it's a lot.
Yeah, it's 1.5 or 1.4 or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Pierre, thank you so much for your time. Certainly good to get some information of where this sits, and we'll be following along with where this goes from here. Certainly some interesting information for farmers to keep tabs on what is happening in the EU. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, Lindsay.